Welcome, field instructors. On behalf of Memorial University School of Social Work, we would like to thank you for investing your time and energy to help provide a field opportunity for our Bachelor of Social Work students. This is their first practicum, and in the university calendar, this is noted as Social Work 3300. We thank you for working with us this semester to mentor students as they transition to social work practice. We hope that the orientation answers any questions you may have, but if not, feel free to reach out to a member of the field education team, and we would be happy to help you. Throughout the orientation, we'll be talking about an overview of field education, so what it is, what do students learn, what do you need to know, and the roles of field instructors and agency mentors, as well as the requirements prior to the practicum and the orientation to the practicum, as well as requirements during the practicum and expectations of students and field instructors and agency mentors. You'll also learn about where to find key resources and documents, the evaluations to be completed, and how to get answers to any questions you may have. Field education is known as social work's signature pedagogy. Signature pedagogy represents the central form of instruction and learning in which a profession, such as social work, socializes its students to perform the role of practitioner. Field education is a component of the curriculum in which students achieve understanding of the relevance of theory to practice and begin or continue to develop competence in using their values, knowledge, and skills. It really is the opportunity for students to move from the classroom setting into the field and into practice. As you can see in the diagram developed by Larkin, we have three cogs. One is field, one is classroom, and one is competent generalist practitioner. And what that means is that for social work as a profession, we have classroom education, but we also have field education. So a social worker cannot truly be educated without having both in their training. Field education truly is the critical bridge between social work education and practice. This is the opportunity for students to take the critical knowledge, skills, and values they've learned in the classroom and then move through their practicums to strengthen them further, develop those skills and knowledge in the field. Further information about the purposes and objectives of field education can be found in the Field Education Manual. There are a few things to consider in regards to the purposes and objectives of field education. As mentioned, further details can be found in the Field Education Manual. An important element of field practicums is that the practicum experience is not just about doing tasks and learning the specific job at an agency or specific forms that need to be completed. These aspects can change 100 times throughout a social worker's career. BSW Field Practicums are instead designed to serve as an educational rather than a training or work experience. Field education is about learning to become a social worker. Practicums and field instruction assist students in making the transition from active learners to professional social workers, with professional socialization being a primary focus of field education, as students develop a professional self-concept. Field education is also the critical component of the curriculum in which students achieve understanding of the relevance of theory to practice and begin to develop competence in using their values, knowledge, and skills. During the practicum, students are expected to further develop professional values, professional identity, relationship building skills, and skills in the art of helping. It is also important for students and field instructors to know that both the BSW and MSW field programs at Memorial are designed to ensure that the field practica meet the Canadian Association for Social Work Education standards for accreditation. So if you're looking for some more information on that, please check out the Canadian Association for Social Work Education website, and we have attached a link there for you. Let's talk a few minutes about the many different people that you, as well as students, will come in contact with during the field education experience. First, there's the field education coordinators here at the school. So we are the people who help coordinate and arrange practicums from the start to the end of the process. Your field liaison is a person who is assigned to you and your student throughout the term, who will be in contact with you and the student at various points to see how things are going, if there are any questions or concerns. One of the field education coordinators here at the school will be your field liaison, and you will be advised as to who that is. As well, some agencies do have an agency coordinator, especially agencies in which we may have more than one field instructor. And so, for example, with Newfoundland Labrador Health Services, the professional practice consultant is the agency coordinator. As well, there's a field instructor. So every student has a field instructor, and that person is responsible for providing the weekly field instruction, as well as completing the evaluations that are required at the midterm and final evaluation, as well as supporting the students in developing their learning contract. The agency mentor, some students don't have a social worker on site, and they would certainly have an agency mentor, and that person is going to be responsible for the day-to-day activities of the students. The university will provide an off-site field instructor in agencies where there is no social worker on site. As well, a student is a registered student here at Memorial University, and service users are individuals, families, communities, groups who use the services of an agency that students may be working with during the semester. So some things to keep in mind before the start of the practicum. It is helpful to identify the types of learning activities appropriate for the student to be involved with throughout the practicum. So having an initial plan in place helps the practicum get off to a good start. The plan will evolve as the practicum progresses. Another thing to keep in mind is arranging space, supplies, and an agency orientation for the student. It is also important to communicate with the field education coordinator and student any screening requirements such as a criminal records check, vulnerable sector check, child protection clearance checks, health screening checks, or any other screening requirements. It is also helpful to let students know what to expect on the first day. So provide the student with helpful information such as a start time, parking, dress code, building access, workplace expectations, hours at the practicum, or any other relevant information you can think of. The academic program assistant for field education will send you a confirmation of agreement form. You can complete that and upload it to IPT. If you're a new field instructor or agency mentor, they will also send the field instructor or agency mentor information form to you. This document can also be uploaded to IPT. It is helpful to take the time to read over the BSW Field Education Checklist for field instructors and agency mentors, the significant dates document, as well as the BSW Field Education Manual and the Field Education Resource Manual. These documents will be a resource for you during the practicum. Here are some important things for you to know about the practicum. The practicum is normally 4 days per week, so this can be altered if the field instructor, student, and school agree. This usually works out to Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday and may change depending on the agency. The student would work out their schedule with their field instructor and agency mentor if applicable. Most students work a typical 8:30 to 4:30 or 9 to 5 arrangement, but students may complete practicum hours in the evenings and weekends, and that is perfectly fine. During the practicum, students will follow the schedule of the agency, which means they will not have a midterm break. To meet accreditation standards, students must complete 350 hours during each of their practicums. They have to complete a total of 350 hours in the practicum, which does not include stat holidays, missed time, sick leave, lunch breaks, or office closures. If students are away from their practicum for more than 3 days, they are required to notify their field liaison of their absence. Special absences should also be discussed with the field liaison and the field instructor in advance. So if they know at the beginning of the term that they need to take a few days off for any reason, that needs to be discussed with the field instructor and field liaison in advance. The practicum is usually 11 to 13 weeks. Under certain circumstances, practicums can be longer than 13 weeks, however, they cannot be less than 11 weeks. If students work extra hours and complete 350 hours in less than 11 weeks, they need to continue the practicum for a total of 11 weeks with a significant number of hours per week and exceed the 350 hours. Field instructors and agencies don't have to agree to change the agency's schedule to accommodate student outside employment or volunteer work. And field instruction does count as part of the 350 hours that they have to complete. While students are completing their practicum, they will be doing a social work course, which is Social Work 3311, Social Work Integration of Theory and Practice. Keep in mind that this course does not count as part of the 350 required practicum hours, so students should not be working on their course during practicum hours. Since their practicum is usually 4 days a week, they will have 1 day during the week to work on their course. Some sections of this course take place during daytime hours, so the student would sort out their practicum schedule with their field instructor if that is the case. Students need to know a lot of information, especially on their first day. And as you well know, they can be quite anxious when they are first starting out. So some of the things we have laid out on this slide are basic things that most of you would cover anyway, but the first thing would be to provide them with some information about the agency and the setting Things such as where do they park, what door do they come into, what are the hours of practicum, can they have lunch there, what office or workstation will they be working in, all those things. Just some basic things like that you can think of. Sub-agencies may have a checklist that students need to know or do. If this is available, it would be helpful for the student to have. In some larger organizations, some students may also have an orientation students may need to attend or learning modules they may need to complete. The students will also need to know the key people they need to meet with and be familiar with at the agency. So that could be an administrative support, could be supervisor, could be other staff that we'll be working with, as well as volunteers. If students could have access to an organizational chart, that would also be very helpful. Safety is a key component of any orientation. Most agencies will have some formal processes in place around fire and safety and those sorts of things. It is important for students to be aware of this information and what to do in an emergency situation. What to do if there's a fire or other emergency situations such as violence or if there's a medical emergency. It is also important for students to become familiar with agency policies. Some agencies may have a formal agency policy manual, and it's important for students to be able to go through it and take a look at it. We've suggested to students to jot down any questions they may have after reading it. It is completely understandable that they are not going to be familiar with everything after looking at a policy manual, but they may be able to have an initial look at it, and then some of the pieces will start to come together later in the practicum. The agency etiquette is also very important for students to know. What is the dress code? What's appropriate to say when they answer the phone? What's the appropriate response to service users in certain questions? All those kinds of things. We are now going to talk about the expectations of all students throughout their practicum. Most of these expectations will be discussed more in depth shortly. We expect students to participate actively in their own learning in the practicum. We ask them to ask questions, be curious, put themselves outside their comfort zone, take on as many learning opportunities as possible to meet the outcomes and the individual learning objectives identified in their learning contract. Also, for them to ask for feedback and be open to feedback. Students are also expected to refer to and follow the guidelines in the BSW Field Education Manual, as well as the other helpful resources. So that would include the significant dates document, checklist for students, guide to developing a strong learning contract, field education resource manual, and they will also continue to review agency policies and procedures throughout the practicum. During the practicum, students will engage in a minimum of 1 hour of weekly field instruction with their field instructor, as well as complete the learning contract with their field instructor. Students are also expected to complete various required practice experiences, as well as required practicum documentation. We also expect students to participate in the evaluation of self, as well as evaluation of the field practicum. This will be discussed more in depth as well throughout the orientation, and of course, students are expected to uphold the SCWK Code of Ethics throughout their practicum. We now move on to the expectations of field instructors. You have a major role with students in teaching students to be social workers. You are the most important part of the practicum. The field instructor assumes a major teaching role with students in the integration of theory and practice in the field. They facilitate student learning through introduction of new theories, knowledge, and research developments relevant to social work practice in the field setting. The field instructor usually assigns work to students, particularly if they are an on-site field instructor. This can involve the selection of cases, groups, and other activities to provide appropriate learning experiences for students. Field instructors also have to have time to be a field instructor. Part of this involves working with students to develop a learning contract, as well as meeting at least once each week for field instruction. Field instructors must view the self-assessments, critical reflection journals, and discuss other requirements of the practicum and discuss students' learning. Field instruction should be a minimum of 1 hour per week. However, there may be some weeks that students may require more field instructor time. A block of time is preferable. We know sometimes this can be very challenging, but in terms of learning and discussing and reflecting, a block of time is ideal. Field instructors also provide consultation and supervision of tasks as needed. They review student documentation and reports and evaluate student performance. They also are required to be in consultation with the field liaison throughout the semester to provide regular updates on how students are doing in their practicum. The liaison will be in touch with you a minimum of 3 times throughout the semester typically at the beginning, around the midterm, and at the end of the placement. If you have any questions or concerns, please let the field liaison know. If you have any concerns, we would expect that to be a process where the field instructors are working with students and identifying if there are any concerns. In an agency where we do not have an on-site field instructor, we usually have an agency mentor. They will provide day-to-day supervision and guidance for a student. We would also expect them to be involved and work in a collaborative way with the field instructor to ensure a rich experience for students. They may assign work to the student as well in consultation with the field instructor, which may include selection of service recipients to work with, projects, and other experiences. They may provide consultation and supervision of tasks as needed. They may review student documentation reports. They also may monitor student progress and collaborate and consult regarding the student's performance. We would also expect agency mentors to assist with the orientation process for students and ensure students have access to the resources needed within the agency. We previously discussed the various roles of those involved in field education. Scherer and Peleg-Oren use the term learning triangle to bring clarity to those involved in the field education process. The learning triangle was elaborated on by Larkin to create a visual similar to that on the slide. On the slide is a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles. One circle is the university, with roles such as field education coordinator and field liaison. Another circle is the student, and the other circle is the agency, with roles of field instructor and agency mentor if applicable. The concept identified that all those involved in field education, the university, the student, and the agency play a part in developing the professional social worker. This is one of the unique aspects of field education. All these vital players have unique roles, responsibilities, and expectations, yet come together to function as a whole to form the basis and vision of field education. So, social work's signature pedagogy. So now we're going to talk about the required practice experiences for students. Practice experience requirements differ depending on whether students are completing a practicum at a field setting focused on practice with individuals, families, and groups, or field settings focused on organizational, community, and policy practice. We will now discuss what those practice requirements are. To discuss the required practice experiences for all practice settings. Students are required to deliver one verbal presentation. The presentation is something we often get questions about from students and field instructors. There's a lot of flexibility with the topic of the presentation, so students and field instructors can be creative, not only to meet the students' learning goals, but to meet a need of the agency as well. It has to be approximately 20 minutes in length, and you and the student will agree on what that topic is going to be. Many times, the field instructor, agency mentor, or another team member may have some items that have been sitting on the side of their desk that they haven't been able to get to. These pieces of work are often great learning for a student. If a student is completing a project, researching a topic, or a policy for the agency, that can also be the topic of their presentation, so keep that in mind. For example, if students are doing research on trauma-informed practice, then they can do a presentation to their team about trauma-informed practice. Or if they are doing an environmental scan of what similar agencies are doing nationally, then they can present their findings. Some students have also planned team building activities and ran those activities with the team. Other students may be involved in developing a program or policy analysis and may present on that. The options are pretty endless. Students can also partner together to complete their presentation. Students would just have to present for approximately 20 minutes each. If you have any questions about the presentation, don't hesitate to reach out to your field liaison. We would also like students to attend agency meetings, in-service sessions, anything at all that is related to the agency if it's appropriate. This could be team meetings, committees you or other team members are involved in, team planning days, training opportunities, an annual general meeting, just to name a few. Students are also required to complete a minimum of 4 agency visits during their practicum. Students are asked to discuss the agency visits with their field instructor, particularly as they are developing their learning contract. You can work together to determine what agency visits may meet their learning goals, as well as support the work you are doing at your agency. For example, what agencies are relevant to the work at the agency, the population at the agency, what agency does your practicum agency refer to, work closely with. Agency visits are an excellent way for students to continue to build connections within the community, gain varying perspectives, enhance the work you are doing at your own agency, and much more. During an agency visit, students are really getting to learn about what an agency does, the population that they serve, and those kinds of things. So it's an excellent opportunity for students to learn more about different agencies in their community. Some agencies may provide an on-site agency visit, while others may provide an information session virtually. Some agencies may go ahead and put together an information session for students, but typically students would have to arrange a visit with an agency on their own. One thing we do strongly recommend to students is visiting an agency as a group. In other words, agencies would prefer to not have one student contacting them one day and another student contacting them the next. We have suggested this to students as well. The following slide speaks to required practice experiences for students completing their practicum in field settings focused on practice with individuals, families, and groups. Students would also engage in at least one project. As mentioned, it's important to keep in mind that the project can inform their presentation. The project and presentation do not have to be connected, but many students do connect their project and presentation. As with the presentation, there's a lot of flexibility with this project, so you and the students can be creative. Students can do community development project, policy analysis, research, program development, proposal writing, and committee work. The project typically not only meets some of the students' learning goals, but can also build upon capacity within an agency. Many field instructors and agency mentors have items that they would like to get to, and this is a great opportunity to not only meet the students' needs, but also the needs of your agency and team. Is there a topic or resources your team would like to learn more about? Are there policies or programs that need to be updated? Is your agency trying to do an environmental scan of what other similar agencies are doing? Are you trying to develop resources for your service users, such as posters, pamphlets, or social media or website content? Is there a proposal that you've been trying to get to and you just haven't had the time to write it? Or projects on a committee that you haven't been able to get to? All these examples are excellent learning opportunities for students, and as with the presentation, the project options are quite endless. These students will also be engaging in direct practice with a minimum of 5 different individuals, families, and or groups. They potentially could be working with more than 5 service users, but it would be a minimum of 5, and the length of time working with service user could vary from a short period of time depending on the agency and its mandate, or it could be a longer period of time throughout the term, and that is perfectly fine. This slide speaks to examples of practice activities with individuals, families, and groups. These examples are intended to illustrate the range of practice activities students may encounter during practicum and are not meant to be exhaustive. Learning opportunities will vary across practicum settings. Students are not expected to complete every activity. Rather, they should engage in practice experiences that align with their learning goals, practicum setting, and available learning opportunities. There is no specific requirement for the number of practice activities or time spent with service users. They will vary among placements, and 2 students in the same agency likely will have a different opportunities for working with service users. So some examples of practice activities include screening, intake, assessment or risk assessment, referral, advocacy, resource coordination, supportive counseling, adjustment counseling, change focused counseling, psychoeducational interventions, substance use or misuse counseling, social skill or life skill development, conflict resolution intervention, family intervention, group work, case management, or it could be discharge planning. Students completing their practicum in field settings focus on organizational, community, and policy practice are required to engage in organizational, community, and or policy practice through a minimum of 2 different types of practice activities. As noted previously, examples of practice activities are intended to illustrate the range of practice activities students may encounter during practicum and are not meant to be exhaustive. Learning opportunities will vary across different practicum settings, and students are not expected to complete every activity on this list. Rather, they should engage in experiences aligned with their learning goals, the practicum setting, and available learning opportunities. So examples of some of the learning activities would be program or event learning, marketing, implementation, and evaluation. Could be group work, could be team committee or board work, task force or advocacy group involvement, coalition formulation and maintenance, meso or macro level advocacy, community analysis, community organizing, needs assessment, leadership development, staff development, policy analysis and development, could be issue analysis, organizational assessment and development, could be networking, research and program evaluation, financial resource development, plan change techniques, resource development, public education, or presentations. All students have the following required practicum documentation. Each requirement will be explained further shortly. The required practicum documentation includes timesheet and field instruction record, which is completed in IPT, the daily log or planner documenting use of practicum time, critical reflection journals, which also includes the week 2 learning contract development and reflection, as well as student self-assessments. And the self-assessments are the initial student self-assessment, the student midterm self-assessment and reflection, the student final self-assessment and reflection, as well as field setting documentation and professional writing as required. The first type of recording students must do on their practicum is their timesheet and field instruction record, which is found in IPT. Additional information regarding IPT can be found in the BSW IPT manual, which is found on the field education website. Here's an example of what the timesheet and field instruction record looks like in IPT. We have asked students to follow the written directions carefully. Students will be recording their time in their practicum as well as their field instruction time with their field instructor each week. The text on the screen may look slightly different by September, but overall will be quite similar. As noted in IPT, in the hours of practice rows, please record the total number of hours students were at their practicum each day. In the hours of supervision rows, students record the number of hours they received field instruction each week. Students should have a minimum of 1 hour of dedicated field instruction time per week. Students do not need to record informal daily supervision, only the weekly field instruction block. Students' hours of supervision should already be counted in their hours of practice, so they do not count twice. Students keep track of their hours. At the midterm and final, the timesheet and supervision record are electronically signed in IPT by the student, field instructor, or field instructors, and the agency mentor if applicable. Students are expected to keep a daily log during their practicum. Daily logs are designed to assist students in tracking their activities on a daily basis. They are also quite helpful during field instruction. There is no set format for a daily log. However, students often use an electronic calendar or diary, such as Outlook Calendar, or may use a written daily planner. Students can discuss their preferred format for the daily log with their field instructor and agency mentor, if applicable. The daily logs are only viewed by the field instructor and agency mentor, except in exceptional circumstances where the field liaison would have access. During the practicum, all students will be completing self-assessments at the beginning of the practicum, at the midterm point, and at the end of the practicum. These self-assessments are called the initial student self-assessment, the student midterm self-assessment and reflection, and the student final assessment and reflection. All of these documents only need to be submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor. It is important to retain a copy, however, in case these documents are requested by the field team. Students will complete the initial student self-assessment at the beginning of the practicum. It is submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor prior to the first field instruction session, typically at least 24 hours in advance or an agreed upon time between the student and the field instructor. The initial student self-assessment provides an opportunity for students to reflect on the learning before beginning practicum. It is intended to help students identify their strengths, experiences, and learning goals and support needs, reflect on their goals for practicum, consider the types of support that will help them succeed, begin building a collaborative working relationship with their field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, and provide a foundation for developing the learning contract, which we will discuss later in the orientation. More detail regarding format for responses can be found on the initial student self-assessment document. The next self-assessment that students will complete is the midterm self-assessment and reflection. Students will complete this at the midpoint of the practicum and will typically submit this document to their field instructor and agency mentor 1 week prior to the midterm evaluation meeting, or an agreed upon time by the student and field instructor. The midterm self-assessment and reflection provides students with an opportunity to pause, reflect, and discuss their learning midway through the practicum. It is intended to support ongoing learning, collaboration, by encouraging students to reflect on progress toward the learning outcomes identified in the learning contract, recognize accomplishments, strengths, and areas for professional growth, Identify learning priorities and any adjustments to learning activities for the remainder of the practicum. Reflect on the practicum experience, including the field setting and the field instruction process, and to contribute to collaborative planning for the remainder of the practicum. The midterm self-assessment and reflection is intended to support collaborative discussion during the midterm evaluation meeting. Students' reflections may be referenced within the field instructor's midterm evaluation to acknowledge progress, highlight strengths, and identify priorities for continued learning. The midterm self-assessment and reflection is intended to support honest reflection and collaborative discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. Meaningful reflection on accomplishments, challenges, and learning priority is encouraged. More detail regarding format for responses can be found on the midterm student self-assessment and reflection document. The last self-assessment students will be completing is the final self-assessment and reflection. Students will complete this at the end of the practicum and will typically submit this document to their field instructor and agency mentor 1 week prior to the final evaluation meeting or an agreed upon time by the student and the field instructor. The final student self-assessment and reflection provides students with an opportunity to reflect on their learning, professional development, and overall practicum experience as they prepare to complete their first practicum. It is intended to support students in reflecting on progress toward the learning outcomes identified in the learning contract, recognizing their strengths, accomplishments, and areas for professional growth, considering how their knowledge, skills, values, and professional identity have developed throughout the practicum, as well as identifying priorities for continued learning and future practicum experiences, and supporting a sense of closure through reflection on the overall practicum experience. The final student self-assessment and reflection is intended to support collaborative discussion during the final evaluation meeting. Students' reflections may be referenced within the field instructor's final evaluation to acknowledge learning, highlight strengths, and identify priorities for continued professional development. The self-assessment is intended to support honest reflection and collaborative discussion. There are no right or wrong answers, so meaningful reflection on accomplishments, challenges, and professional growth is encouraged. Once again, more detail regarding format for responses can be found on the final student self-assessment and reflection document. Now we're going to move along to the outcomes of the practicum and the learning contract. During the field practicum, students' learning is based on 5 overall outcomes or expectation areas. They are 1. Field setting and community context. 2. Teaching and learning context. 3. Theory and practice. 4. Self-awareness. And 5. Professional context. When you look at the learning contract, which we'll be talking about shortly, it is based on these outcomes that students are expected to develop knowledge and skill in. Further detailed information can also be found in the field education manual. Now we are going to discuss the learning contract. The learning contract is one of the first tasks completed during practicum. It serves as a roadmap for learning throughout the practicum by identifying what the student hopes to learn, how learning will occur, opportunities for feedback and supervision, and priorities for ongoing growth. The learning contract is developed collaboratively by the student and the field instructor and the agency mentor where applicable. It is led by the student. It is individualized to the practicum setting, and it is a living document that may be revised throughout the practicum as learning opportunities evolve. It also clarifies the roles and responsibilities of the student, field instructor, and agency mentor where applicable throughout the practicum, and helps ensure the student has opportunities to develop and demonstrate social work values, knowledge, and skills for each identified outcome. A well-developed learning contract supports intentional learning, meaningful supervision discussions, and ongoing reflection throughout the practicum. The next slide speaks to the students' responsibilities in regards to the learning contract. So students are expected to take the lead in developing a draft learning contract by reflecting on learning goals and areas for growth, identify learning activities and individualized learning objectives, or ILOs, discussing and refining the draft with the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, as well as entering the finalized learning contract into IBT. The student's also responsible for revising the learning contract as needed based on feedback from the field instructor, agency mentor where applicable, and the field liaison, and revisiting the learning contract throughout the practicum. We're now going to talk about learning contract resources. So resources have been developed to support students in developing their learning contract. both of which will be discussed shortly. Both of these documents can be found on the Field Education website. So one of the resources is the Guide to Developing a Strong Learning Contract, and the other is the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection. So the first resource we're going to talk about is the Guide to Developing a Strong Learning Contract. And this is an optional resource to support students in developing a meaningful learning contract. It includes practical guidance, planning prompts, examples, and writing tips for developing learning activities and individualized learning objectives. Students may use this guide when completing the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection, and throughout the practicum when revisiting or refining their learning contract. The next document we're going to discuss is the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection. So that provides students with an opportunity to begin developing their individualized learning contract while reflecting on their initial experiences in practicum. It is intended to help students develop a draft learning contract by identifying individualized learning goals, learning activities, and areas for professional growth, as well as identifying learning activities that support the learning contract outcomes. As well, it allows students to begin to connect classroom learning with practice experiences, reflect on their early practicum experiences, and prepare for ongoing field instruction, supervision, and critical reflection throughout the practicum. On the slide are the minimum requirements for the learning contract. These minimum requirements apply to each of the 5 learning outcomes, so students may identify additional activities or learning objectives based on their learning needs and available practicum opportunities. So as you can see in the table, students must identify a minimum of 2 learning activities that support achievement of the overall learning outcome. Students must identify a minimum of 1 individualized learning objective related to the overall learning outcome, as well as a minimum of 2 learning activities that support achievement of your individualized learning objective. As mentioned previously, students are expected to take the lead in preparing the draft learning contract, which will then be reviewed, discussed, and refined collaboratively with the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, before being finalized in IPT. Students should submit the completed Week 2 learning contract development and reflection to their field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, typically at least 24 hours before the Week 2 scheduled field instruction session, or according to another mutually agreed upon timeline. Students should retain a copy of the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection, as it may be requested by the field education team. Once the student and their field instructor and agency mentor have agreed upon the individualized learning objectives and in learning activities, the student would then enter them into IPT by the 15th day of the practicum. The student and their field instructor and agency mentor then sign the learning contract in IPT. The signed learning contract is then reviewed and signed by your field liaison. There is a possibility that the field liaison may suggest revisions, as the responsibility for final approval of the learning contract rests with your field liaison. As previously noted, the learning contract is a working document and may be revised throughout the practicum. Any updates must be reflected in the most current version uploaded to IPT. We're now going to talk about the critical reflection journals. So the Field Practicum Critical Reflection Journal is intended to support ongoing learning, meaningful dialogue, and reflective supervision throughout the practicum. It is not intended to be completed as a weekly checklist. Rather, it serves as a flexible tool to help students and field instructors identify significant learning experiences, monitor progress, and guide field instruction discussions. The Critical Reflection Journal is designed to serve as a tool to prepare for and develop the agenda for field instruction sessions, foster open communication with the field instructor and agency mentor if applicable, support ongoing reflection on learning contract outcomes and practicum requirements, strengthen the integration of classroom learning and practice, promote critical thinking, self-awareness, and professional identity development, encourage reflection on the broader social, political, cultural, organizational, and historical contexts that shape social work practice, as well as support ethical and anti-oppressive social work practice. The next slide speaks to using the critical reflection journals. So the journal is intended to be flexible and individualized. Students are not expected to respond to every reflection question each week. Instead, they should select the question that best supports reflection on the most significant learning experiences, challenges, successes, or questions that emerge during that stage of the practicum. Over the course of the practicum, students should vary the questions they respond to in consultation with the field instructor and agency mentor so that learning contract outcomes are addressed while avoiding repetitive reflections. Questions may be revisited throughout the practicum, that's not an issue. However, responses should demonstrate new learning, deeper understanding, or continued professional growth rather than repeating previous reflections. The goal is depth rather than length. Meaningful reflection moves beyond describing what happened to considering why an experience was significant, what was learned, how it relates to social work knowledge and values, and how it may influence future practice. Responses may be written in point form or brief paragraphs, so some students find it helpful to express their learning through more detailed written reflections before field instruction, while others prefer to record brief notes and explore their thinking more fully through discussion during supervision. Both approaches are appropriate when they support meaningful reflection and preparation for field instruction. As previously said, students are expected to receive a minimum of 1 hour of field instruction each week. So field instruction may include review of the critical reflection journal, written and or verbal feedback, and discussion between the student and the field instructor, and the agency mentor may be involved as well. Students who complete more detailed written reflections may require less discussion of those topics during the supervision meeting, while students who provide briefer written reflections may use more of the supervision time to verbally explore their learning. The next slide speaks to critical reflection journal submission guidelines. So critical reflection journals are completed during each designated week of practicum as identified in the significant dates document. So the significant dates document can also be found on the field education website. The critical reflection journals are submitted to the field instructor and agency mentor where applicable, typically at least 24 hours before the scheduled field instruction session, or according to another mutually agreed upon time between the student and the field instructor and agency mentor. Students should retain copies of all critical reflection journals as they may be requested by the field education team. Students do not submit the critical reflection journals to their field liaison unless they are requested to do so. We will now discuss some helpful resources and tips to support students in writing the critical reflection journal. The Field Education Resource Manual should hopefully be a very helpful document for students. This resource package provides a brief overview of the primary principles, values, theories, perspectives, knowledge, approaches, and practice skills that social work students are taught in social work and non-social work courses during the Bachelor of Social Work program at Memorial University. The resource is intended to support students, field instructors, and agency coordinators in integrating classroom learning with practicum experiences. It is designed to complement the field instruction discussions and the critical reflection journal by assisting students in connecting theory, practice, professional values, ethical decision making, and reflective practice. Students will also be referring to their learning contract throughout the practicum, as well as the CASW Code of Ethics. Many students find it helpful to record brief notes or reflections throughout the week as experiences occur, rather than trying to remember everything immediately before field instruction. These notes can make critical reflection journals more manageable and support richer discussion during field instruction. We will now be discussing the final practicum documentation requirement, which is field setting documentation and professional writing. Students are expected to develop documentation and professional writing skills throughout their practicum. Documentation requirements vary across practice settings, however, students should become familiar with common forms of agency documentation and professional writing. Various examples of agency documentation and professional writing can be found in the Field Education Resource Manual, including examples of professional communication, service user documentation, reports, and administrative documentation. Some additional important information to keep in mind is that field setting documentation is the property of the field setting, and that agency documentation must be read and signed by field instructors and agency mentors for legal purposes. Feedback from field instructors and agency mentors will assist students in developing a professional social work writing style appropriate for agency records. The remaining slides will discuss the evaluations that are completed during the practicum. Additional information about the evaluations can be found in the BSW Field Education Manual. These evaluations include the midterm evaluation of the student, the final evaluation of the student, and the student evaluation of the field practicum. So let's just talk a little bit more about the evaluations of the student. Evaluation is one of those words for a lot of people that can bring about feelings of anxiety, and students are no exception to that. Students are often very anxious about evaluation, and they want to know what they're doing okay, as well as what they need to improve. It's also important to remember that the evaluation starts with the learning contract, so it actually really does start at the beginning of the practicum. Although the midterm and the final are the formal evaluation periods, evaluation is really meant to be an ongoing process. We have let students know that completing critical reflection journals and the self assessments are an excellent time to reflect on their own progress. Weekly field instruction sessions are also a great time for the student and field instructor to check in and for the students to get feedback on their strengths, areas they can grow, and where they are in this practicum process. Ideally, any feedback at the midterm and final evaluation shouldn't be a surprise to the student if the student, field instructor, and agency mentor are engaged in open communication throughout the practicum. We've mentioned to students that it also really comes back to them approaching the practicum as an adult learner, engaging in their own critical reflection, seeing where they are with the learning contract, strengthening their self awareness, and asking and being open to feedback, not just from the field instructor, but from other team members as well. We will get into the midterm and final evaluation processes in the following slides. However, it is important to know that the field instructor is responsible for writing the evaluation. Evaluation for both the midterm and final evaluation are based on a number of factors. It's based on the student self-assessment that students complete at the beginning of the practicum and at the midterm and at the end of the practicum, as well as required practicum documentation such as timesheet and field instruction record, the daily log or a planner documenting their use of time, the critical reflection journals, and that includes the week 2 learning contract development and reflection, as well as field setting documentation and professional writing, and the learning contract and the student's performance. So we're also looking at the School of Social Work suitability policy. If you're not familiar with that policy, you can go to the School of Social Work website. The field instructor also typically engages with other team members to get their feedback and could also ask volunteers and service users as well. As well, students are evaluated based on how they're abiding by the CASW Code of Ethics. Let's talk a bit about the rating scale that we use on the midterm and final evaluations. The learning contract, the midterm, and the final are all built in, so it's a living document that we use, and it is one document that has everything in it: the learning contract, the midterm, and the final. So basically, in the first practicum, BSW students are expected to be at a beginning level of competence. However, by the end of the practicum, we expect students to meet all the learning outcomes in their learning contract. The grading choices for the midterm and final evaluations includes meets expectations, so that's ME, needs improvement, or NI, is not meeting expectations, NM, or not yet observed, NYO. In terms of meeting expectations, we know that students are consistently demonstrating an acceptable level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. In terms of needs improvement, the student is demonstrating a minimum level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. So they are demonstrating that there are some of those things there, but there are still some strengthening and they need to build upon it. Basically, with not meeting expectations, the student is failing to demonstrate a minimal level of theory and skills, creativity, critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. For not yet observed, this would indicate that the student has not had sufficient opportunity to demonstrate theory and skills, creativity and critical thinking, analytical skills, communication skills, professional and ethical behavior. So this rating may be used only for the midterm evaluation and is not available for the final evaluation. As well, we ask field instructors to provide qualitative feedback on student performance in the comment and summary sections of the midterm and final evaluation. This could include their strengths and areas for further development and future learning. All of these things will be really helpful for students for their own development in their knowledge and skills in the field of social work. As a field instructor, you possess a lot of great skills and knowledge, including assessment and intervention skills, knowledge of the practice area, critical thinking skills, and critical reflection skills. All of these skills and knowledge that you possess will aid you in the evaluation process of the student. First, we'll be talking about the midterm evaluation. The midterm typically occurs at about week 6 of the practicum, so about the halfway point. The midterm evaluation is completed by the field instructor, typically in consultation with other team members, whether that be an agency mentor, volunteers, or clients if appropriate. The midterm evaluation will summarize the student's activities in the practicum, the student's strengths and areas for improvement, general level of student competence in regards to social work values, knowledge, and skills at that point of evaluation, plans for student activities and emphasis from the midterm to the end of the practicum, as well as students' needs for learning and development and requisite learning opportunities. Prior to the midterm evaluation, students are required to complete the midterm self-assessment and reflection, which can be found on the field education website. Students are asked to submit this to their field instructor 1 week prior to the midterm evaluation meeting or an agreed upon date with the field instructor. The field instructor and agency mentor, if applicable, completes a draft of the midterm evaluation using a learning contract. Field instructors are encouraged to include components of the student's midterm self-assessment and reflection in the midterm evaluation in IPT. A formal evaluation takes place, usually during a regularly scheduled field instruction session. This would include the field instructor and student and the agency mentor, if applicable. We usually recommend field instructors to provide students with a draft of the evaluation 24 hours in advance of this meeting to give students the opportunity to reflect on the evaluation. Following the meeting, the field instructor would finalize the evaluation in IPT, and the student, field instructor, and agency mentor then electronically sign the evaluation in IPT. If for some reason there are any concerns, the field instructor would clearly document them and discuss them with the student. More than likely, the field liaison would then meet with the student and the field instructor. We would talk about any particular concerns and areas of growth and develop a plan together to work toward meeting the outcomes and expectations of the practicum during the second half. So as would be expected, the final evaluation occurs at the end of the practicum, typically during the last week. The process for the final evaluation is similar to the midterm evaluation. Similar to the midterm evaluation, students are required to complete the final assessment and reflection, which can be found on the field education website. Students are asked to submit this to their field instructor 1 week prior to the final evaluation meeting or an agreed upon date with the field instructor. The field instructor would write up a draft of the final evaluation and provide the student with some time to review it, often 24 hours in advance. The field instructor and student would then meet to discuss the final evaluation, typically during the final field instruction session. Usually, when writing the evaluation, the field instructor seeks additional input from the agency mentor, if applicable, other team members, volunteers, and possibly even service users. If the student has an agency mentor, the agency mentor would typically be present during the evaluation meeting as well. Field instructors are also encouraged to include content from the final self-assessment and reflection in the student's final evaluation in IPT. Some questions the final evaluation usually addresses includes, were all the goals met? Has the student completed the minimum expected outcomes? What are the final thoughts about the student and the practicum experience? What are the student's strengths? What are areas for future professional development? Could also be suggestions for the next practicum. What type of agency or service user population may be a good fit? What types of skills does the student still need to work on? What are some gaps in the student's knowledge? The evaluation may also address the student's suitability for the profession. Following the final evaluation meeting, the final evaluation must be signed and dated electronically in IPT by the field instructor, student, and the agency mentor if applicable. It is also important to keep in mind that many field instructors often use the final evaluation as a foundation for future professional references. So there is an evaluation of the agency and the field instructor as well. The verbal feedback is provided by the student during the practicum, but the student has an opportunity to complete an evaluation form after the final evaluation of the student is submitted. It is only shared with the field instructor if the student agrees, unless the SCWK Code of Ethics is breached. If the code is breached, the concerns must be addressed by the field liaison and through the agency. At the end of the practicum, the field instructor or agency mentor will also have an opportunity to do an evaluation of the field practicum, and this will be completed in IPT. And this provides us with vital information about your feedback and experiences throughout the practicum, and we certainly appreciate any feedback that you provide. Throughout the orientation, we discuss various field education resources. To bring all the resources together, you can find the following field education resources on the school's field website. So those resources be the BSW Field Education Manual, the Field Education Resource Manual, the Guide for Developing a Strong Learning Contract, the checklist for field instructors and agency mentors, the checklist for students, as well as the significant dates documents, and the user guide for IPT. A number of the practicum documents can also be found on the school's field website, such as the initial student self-assessment, the Week 2 Learning Contract Development and Reflection, the Critical Reflection Journal, the Student Midterm Self-Assessment and Reflection, and the Student Final Self-Assessment and Reflection. The rest of the forms are completed in IPT, which we will now discuss. Our Intern Practicum Tracking Database, or IPT for short, is a database that allows students, field instructors, agency mentors, and field education coordinators to efficiently and effectively complete administrative tasks related to field education. This includes keeping relevant practicum and contact information up to date, and accessing and completing forms online. We have a helpful IPT manual and IPT tutorial videos available that should hopefully give you a good overview of how to use IPT and complete the field practicum forms. They are available on the school's field education website. We also ask the students keep their emergency contact up to date in IPT in case you need to contact them. Hopefully that won't happen, but it's good to know the information is there just in case. The forms completed in IPT by the student and field instructor include the timesheet and supervision record, the learning contract, midterm evaluation, final evaluation, and both the student and the field instructor complete an evaluation of the practicum. Students have also been asked to be aware of agency policies and procedures and to become familiar with them and understand what they mean. CSW stresses the importance of confidentiality when working with service users. We have asked students to be respectful of confidential service user information and handle it appropriately. We also ask the students to be familiar with the social media policy and guidelines for social work students. Social media was never an issue many years ago, but it certainly is now. So we have asked them to become familiar with the social media policy and take a look at their own social media and whatever they have there on the World Wide Web and see whether or not it is appropriate. We have also asked students to consider their cell phone usage. It would be helpful for you to discuss with the student what the policies or expectations are regarding cell phone usage at your agency, as it can vary from agency to agency. In general, we have asked students to keep in mind that if they wish to look at apps, check social media, or check personal email, etc., that it should be done during their break time. We have also asked students to keep boundaries in mind and to think about what the Code of Ethics says about boundaries. We have asked them to discuss any questions they may have about boundaries with their field instructors, staff at the agency, or their field liaison. It is important that students are appropriately dressed when they are at the agency. We've asked them to take their lead from their field instructor and from the other agency staff. We've also asked if they are not going to be at the agency, that they please make sure that they let their field instructor know and any appropriate staff that they have designated. We recognize as well that incidences occur in the community and that media may be interested. So we have stressed to students that any media requests that they become aware of, that they should refer them back to the agency and to the field instructor. They've been made aware that it is not their job to discuss situations with the media. Thank you for taking the time to listen in. We hope that this orientation was helpful. We certainly would not have field education without the dedication of our social work community. Reach out to a member of the field education team if you have any questions. Our academic program assistant Felix will be able to answer many of the questions you may have. If not, he will be able to connect you with the relevant field education coordinator. Meanwhile, your field liaison will be in touch early in the semester and you can contact them as needed. If you have any questions at all about the practicum, be sure to let your field liaison know so that they can work with you to resolve things. Thanks again.